So the next topic is illumination sudden or gradual? Does it come all at once, or does it develop gradually? And this is, if you study the spiritual literature, there's a lot of controversy about this. One of the great Zen masters, I think it was Hui Neng, there were two students in line to succeed the master, and one wrote a poem about how you gradually clear the window and then the light comes through, and that was the theory of gradual enlightenment. And Hui Neng wrote a poem about how enlightenment comes instantaneously, and he was chosen by the master to be the successor, because in the moment of illumination, it comes like a flash. It's sudden. But PB points out to be able to receive the illumination requires a lot of effort and development on our part. So it's not wrong to say that we have to clean the window, because it comes gradually, but the final moment, it comes in a flash. And PB gives us examples of different people who may be very unusual, and these unusual people will receive the lightning flash, the glimpse in a moment, in a short time, such as Ramana Maharshi or Ramakrishna. These people do, in the lifetime that we know, do very little work, and they get it. So he says, does enlightenment come all of a sudden, or do we have to work slowly for it by degree? The answer varies with the case concerned. Most need time to fit and equip themselves for the glorious moment of insight, but a few receive it in a day. It must be remembered that it does not actually happen in time, but out of time in the great stillness. The person does not know the absolute final truth a second before, and then it is all there. So, as we said, it comes suddenly, but it
could be also.
It might take a long time to get to that moment where it comes to you in a flash.
Come slowly or may come suddenly, but in the second case, he say, it has effect of sunlight bursting through the sky. You know, could be in one way or could be in another way, but, you know, hardly comes at all at once.
Right. So it's really, the answer is both and. It's not either or. The next thing PB talks about that we want to present is that there are degrees or grades of enlightenment. And this is important because if we think of enlightenment as only one state, we may equate different degrees of illumination that are not equal. And PB is clear to point out that there are degrees. So he says, it is not only true that there is variety in the types of illumination, but there is also a scale of degrees in the state of illumination itself. So for example, PB talks about the witness eye, that we become fixed in a consciousness of observation, and we are no longer inside of our egos, but we're observing everything like the way we see a dream with ourselves in it. And if you become stabilized in that witness position, that can be an experience of illumination that is permanent. But that's the lowest degree of illumination, because you're still experiencing yourself as separate. Everything is there. I'm observing it. I'm observing myself in it. And I'm neutral about everything because I'm in this observing consciousness, but that's only the first step.
Because has another step that is the big witness that are perceiving, observe the witness. And he said the last stage is still, it is when you are only being.
You're
like
pure being.
Pure being. That means like to be the witness is a good point, you know, is a good, if we reach this point, but to be the witness of the witness is still, you know, is the second point, and you have really to be. In the moment we are be, then that is, he said, if you could consider the final, you know, but as PB say, even Sahaja Samadhi, you know, is the last stage, we could say, but for us to live is here in this earth, like he don't affirm that is really, you know, the final, you know, illumination. But for us here in this planet as human being, that is could be the final.
So the Sahaja state, which is the non-dual state, is one of the topics we're reserving for further discussion, but that's the ultimate or the highest state of illumination possible, and that's different from the witness or observing state of consciousness. PB also points out that the illuminated person is not omniscient. They don't have the complete infinite knowledge of the world mind, but they can have a glimpse of the world idea, which is the vision that Arjuna had, that he was given by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna saw the whole cosmos or the whole divine mind in a flash, but he couldn't stay in that state. And that state is not something that all illuminated people have.
Yes, PB say then that you could see God, but you can't to be God. That isn't possible for us as human being, like living in this flesh. That could be real and completely only after we live, these bodies, because the infinite being like the Brahma Nirguna can't be fit inside of our, finite being.
The infinite cannot be compressed into the finite, and someone who's incarnated in a body has an aspect of finiteness, even if they are aware of their infiniteness. So long as the person is held by the finite flesh, so long as existence in the inner human body is continued, the perfect and complete merger of their individuality in the cosmic mind is impossible. But once through the portals of death, it becomes an actuality. So a lot of times we hear how the drop merges in the ocean, and PB's clarifying that the drop doesn't lose its awareness of itself as a drop as long as it's in a body. The final merger cannot happen while in a body. So let's say, there's a limitation on the state of illumination, even if it can be permanent. So this leads us to the next topic, which is PB says that in the state of illumination, the individuality remains. You don't lose your sense of yourself as an individual. He says, we do not accept the interpretation of mystic experience which proclaims it to be an extinction of human personality in God's being. The differences between human beings still remain after illumination. The variations which make each one a unique specimen and the individual that they are still continue to exist. But the oneness behind human beings powerfully counterbalances. So we can imagine a person like PB is always aware of this oneness because his ego has been subordinated to his overself, and he's in union with his overself. So the sense of the oneness is always there. But on the other side of the coin is PB with his body and his mind and his emotions and his habits. PB was English. He wore a tie even when he was sitting in front of Ramana, right? He drank tea. So the personality remains, but the personality is subordinated to the overself and obeys the dictates of the overself. PB says, there is no final absorption. The individual continues to exist somehow in the supreme.
The overself is one with the world mind without, however, being lost in it. That also so important point that has, this kind of unity, but he isn't lost, in the supreme.
So if you think of the overself as a ray of the sun, the ego becomes united with the overself. And in that union, the overself or the ray of the sun is united or aware of the sun itself, but the ray of the sun does not melt back into the sun as long as the person is alive. He says, on the one hand, the illuminated person is conscious of themselves in the divine being. On the other, they are conscious of themselves in the human ego. So it's like a dual consciousness. Here's PB in his body drinking tea and wearing a tie, and here's divinity and sacredness always present.
Mhm.
The two can coexist, but the ego must knit itself to the higher self until they become like a single entity.
Mhm.
When the mind is immovably fixed in this state, the personal will is permanently directed by the higher one. Then the person is said to have attained the true mystical life.
I'm wondering how is the word for this being so illuminated, how he see the word. He see the word or he doesn't see the word?
So now we get to the next point. And PB's very subtle. He doesn't always tell us that he's disagreeing or refuting something. He just says what he knows. But all these points we're making, PB's correcting misunderstandings of illumination. He's correcting the misunderstanding that you become one with God, or that your individuality persists, or that the world disappears. So let's answer Grant's question and see what PB says about the world. PB says that the world continues. He says, of little use, now he's going to take a little dig at something. Of little use are explanations which befog truth and bewilder understanding. To inform a Western reader that an enlightened person sees only Brahman is to imply that this person does not see forms. I only see God, but I still walk across the street and don't get hit by the car, so I'm still living in the world of form. The fact is that the enlightened person does see what unenlightened people see, the physical objects and creatures around them, or the enlightened person could not take care of the simplest little necessity or duty which all humans have to take care of, like getting dressed in the morning or driving a car or whatever we do. But the enlightened person sees things without being limited to their physical appearance. The enlightened person knows their inner reality. So the world is there, but the world is floating in the sea of divinity, and the world is inside of, or an appearance within the sea of divinity, but the appearance is still there, and the appearance is divine because it's part of the divinity. Whereas we tend to be taught that like everything dissolves and there's only God. Well, if everything dissolves and there's only God, how am I going to like put the spoon and the fork in my mouth?